The moment my son threw my suitcase onto the front porch, I knew 12 years of silence were about to become the best investment I ever made. I stood there in my good Sunday dress, watching my own flesh and blood lock me out like yesterday's garbage. Little did they know yesterday's garbage was about to become worth $8 million. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Let me tell you how a 60-year-old woman went from homeless to homeowner of the most expensive mansion in Millbrook Heights. Because honey, revenge isn't a dish best served cold. It's best served with a side of pure, unadulterated success. My name is Margaret Williams, but everyone calls me Maggie. At 72, I've learned that the only thing better than proving people wrong is making them regret ever doubting you in the first place. And boy did my son James and his wife Jessica give me plenty to prove. It was October 15, 2012 when my world fell apart. I'd been living with James and Jessica for 3 months after my husband died, helping with their 2 young children while I figured out my next steps. The life insurance money wasn't much, and I thought family was supposed to help each other through tough times. "Mom, we need to talk," James said that morning, his voice cold in a way I'd never heard before. Jessica stood behind him, arms crossed, wearing that smug expression I'd grown to hate. At 33, she had the kind of sharp beauty that cut people when they got too close. "What's wrong, honey?" I asked, setting down my coffee cup on their granite countertop, the countertop I'd helped them afford with my Social Security checks for the past year. "This arrangement isn't working anymore," Jessica announced, stepping forward like she owned the conversation, which apparently she did. "You're too set in your ways. Maggie, the children are confused about who's in charge." I looked at James, waiting for him to defend me, to remember that I was his mother who had raised him alone after his father left when he was 8. Instead, he avoided my eyes like I was a stranger asking for spare change. "Where am I supposed to go?" I asked, my voice smaller than I intended. "That's not our problem anymore," Jessica replied with a shrug that would haunt me for years. "You're a grown woman. Figure it out." 20 minutes later, my entire life fit into 2 suitcases and a cardboard box. 60 years of memories, photographs, and keepsakes reduced to what I could carry. The rest would go to Goodwill, Jessica informed me cheerfully, as if she was doing me a favor. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," James mumbled as he set my bags on the porch. For a split second, I saw a flicker of the little boy who used to cry when I left for work. Then Jessica appeared beside him, and his face went blank again. The taxi arrived as the first drops of rain began to fall. I climbed in without looking back, not because I was strong but because I was broken. As we drove away, I caught a glimpse of Jessica in their window, already redecorating what had been my temporary bedroom. I had $847 in my purse. No job and nowhere to live. What I didn't have was the slightest idea that this humiliation would become the fuel for the greatest comeback story of my life. The Sunset Motel on Route 9 became my home for the next 6 weeks. And let me tell you, it was exactly as glamorous as it sounds. $43 a night for a room that smelled like industrial cleaner and broken dreams, but it had a roof and a door that locked. After being thrown away like trash, even that felt like a luxury. The elderly desk clerk, Mr. Patterson, took pity on me after the first week. "You're not like our usual guests," he said quietly, sliding an extra towel across the counter. Most of their clientele was either working construction jobs or hiding from something. I was just hiding from the truth that my own son had discarded me. Those first mornings were the hardest. I'd wake up in that narrow bed, forgetting for just a moment where I was, and then reality would hit like a slap. No grandchildren's laughter, no family breakfast to prepare. Just me and the broken air conditioning unit that made sounds like a dying whale. But here's what Jessica and James didn't count on. I'm not the kind of woman who stays down. Never have been. When James was young and we had nothing, I worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat. I cleaned offices at night, worked retail during the day, and took in ironing on weekends. Survival wasn't new to me. I'd just forgotten how good I was at it. The first thing I did was walk to the library every morning. Free internet, free air conditioning, and most importantly, free access to job listings. At 60, nobody was exactly lining up to hire me. But I wasn't looking for charity. I was looking for opportunity. "You have experience in bookkeeping?" asked Sarah Mitchell, the owner of Mitchell's Garden Center. During my 4th interview that week, She was about my age with dirt under her fingernails and a no-nonsense attitude I immediately respected. 20 years, I replied. I handled all the finances for my late husband's contracting business. What I didn't mention was that I'd also spotted at least 3 ways she was losing money just from sitting in her cluttered office for 10 minutes. The inventory system was a mess. She was overpaying suppliers and her pricing structure hadn't been updated since 2008. The pay isn't much, Sarah warned. $15 an hour part-time. When do I start? That first paycheck was $240, and I treated it like I'd won the lottery. After 6 weeks of watching my savings drain away like water through a essay, earning money again felt like breathing after being underwater. The motel room slowly transformed from a temporary stop to something resembling a home. I bought a small coffee maker, hung up my few family photos, and even splurged on a plant for the windowsill. If this was my life now, I was going to live it with dignity. 3 months in, I made my first real discovery. Sarah was throwing away thousands of dollars worth of plants each year. Anything that didn't sell by the end of the season went straight to the dumpster. It's just how the business works, she explained with a resigned shrug. But I saw something else entirely. I saw potential. You want to do what with the dead plants? Sarah asked, looking at me like I'd suggested we start selling fairy dust and unicorn tears. They're not dead. They're dormant, I explained patiently. And with a little care, most of them can be revived and resold next season. This was month 8 of my new life, and I'd moved from the motel to a tiny studio apartment above Yeppy's Pizza. The rent was $650 a month, which left me about $50 for everything else after groceries, but it was mine. No one could kick me out on a whim or decide I was too set in my ways. Sarah let me take home 3 truckloads of dead plants that November, probably figuring it would teach me a lesson about business reality. What it actually taught me was that I had a gift I'd never known about. My tiny apartment became a greenhouse. Every windowsill, every corner, every available surface was covered with pots and planters. I researched plant care on the library computers, watched YouTube videos, and spent my evenings nursing brown wilted stems back to life. The neighbors thought I was crazy. Mrs. Chun from downstairs kept asking if I was running some kind of illegal operation. Too many plants, she'd mutter in broken English whenever she saw me carrying another pot upstairs. But by February, something magical started happening. Green shoots appeared. Buds formed. My studio apartment was transforming into a jungle of healthy, thriving plants. I had over 200 specimens, and about 150 of them were not just alive but flourishing. Maggie, what the hell? Sarah gasped when I brought the first batch back to the garden center in March. These look better than when they were new. Told you they weren't dead, I said, trying to hide my grin. Inside, I was doing cartwheels. This wasn't just about proving a point. This was about discovering I had a talent that could actually make money. Sarah bought back every single plant for half the original retail price. In one transaction, I made $847, more than my first month's salary. But more importantly, I'd found something that felt like purpose again. The next year, our arrangement became official. Sarah would set aside all the unsellable plants for me. I'd rehabilitate them through the winter, and we'd split the profits in spring. It wasn't exactly a business empire, but it was mine. Word started spreading through the gardening community. That lady at Mitchell's can bring anything back to life, people would say. Soon, other garden centers were calling, asking if I'd take their clearance plants too. By the end of year 2, I was making more from plant rehabilitation than from my bookkeeping job. I'd also moved to a larger apartment with a proper balcony, and had turned Joseph's parking lot into an unofficial greenhouse with his permission. The best part, every healthy plant I saved felt like proof that being discarded didn't mean being worthless. Some things just needed the right care, the right attention, and the right person who could see their potential. James and Jessica had thrown me away, assuming I'd wither and disappear. Instead, I was putting down roots in soil they'd never even imagined. Year 3 was when I stopped thinking small and started thinking smart. By this point, I had a waiting list of garden centers wanting me to rehabilitate their clearance plants. And my little apartment operation was bursting at the seams. The landlord had started charging me extra for excessive plant drainage, and Yeppy was getting tired of customers asking if they could buy the beautiful plants covering his parking lot. You need a real facility, Sarah told me during one of our coffee meetings. And you need to think bigger than just saving plants. She was right. But thinking bigger required money I didn't have. My savings account had grown to about $15,000, which felt like a fortune after starting with nothing. But it wasn't enough for commercial space. That's when I met Eleanor Rodriguez at the Small Business Development Center. Eleanor was one of those sharp, efficient women who could spot potential from a mile away and wasn't afraid to push people toward it. "You're not in the plant rehabilitation business," she told me after reviewing my numbers. "You're in the business of turning waste into profit. That's a completely different conversation." Eleanor helped me see what I'd been too close to notice. I wasn't just saving plants. I was solving a major industry problem. Garden centers nationwide were literally throwing away millions of dollars in inventory every year because they didn't know how to handle end-of-season clearance effectively. What if you franchised the process? Eleanor suggested teach other people to do what you do. Take a percentage of their profits and scale the operation nationwide. The idea was terrifying and thrilling all at once. Me, a 63-year-old woman who'd been homeless 3 years earlier running a national business. But the numbers Eleanor showed me were impossible to ignore. We spent 6 months developing a business plan. I would start with a proper facility in Millbrook, perfect the rehabilitation process, document everything, and then begin licensing the method to other operators across the country. The SBA loan application was 47 pages long, and I nearly gave up 3 times trying to fill it out. But Eleanor pushed me through every section, helping me articulate why this wasn't just some crazy plant lady's hobby. It was a legitimate solution to a real problem. "Mrs. Williams," the loan officer said during my final interview, "your financial projections seem optimistic." "Sir," I replied, leaning forward with the confidence of someone who'd proven people wrong before. 3 years ago, I was living in a motel room with less than $1,000 to my name. Last year, I turned $50,000 worth of dead plants into $200,000 in revenue. I'd say my track record speaks for itself. The $150,000 loan approval came through on a Tuesday in March. I signed the papers in Eleanor's office, my hands shaking slightly as I realized I was now responsible for more money than I'd ever imagined. Within 6 months, I'd leased a 5,000 QFT warehouse on the outskirts of town, hired 2 part-time employees, and established contracts with 15 garden centers across 3 states. Phoenix Plant Recovery, because everything deserves a second chance, was officially born. The irony wasn't lost on me. My son had thrown me away, assuming I was worthless. Now I was building a business empire based on proving that nothing is ever truly worthless, if you know how to see its potential. By year 5, Phoenix Plant Recovery had grown beyond anything I'd imagined possible. We were operating in 12 states, had 47 licensed operators, and I just signed a consulting contract with Home Depot's regional headquarters. The scared, broken woman who'd been thrown out with the trash was now being flown to corporate meetings in Atlanta. "Mrs. Williams, your success story is exactly what our industry needs to hear," said David Chun, Home Depot's sustainability director, as we toured their flagship store. "Turning waste into profit while helping the environment. That's the future of retail." I smiled politely, still getting used to being treated like an expert instead of an inconvenience. The transformation hadn't been easy. There had been plenty of 18-hour days, failed experiments, and moments when I wondered if I was in over my head. But every challenge had taught me something new about business, about myself, and about what I was truly capable of. My personal life had stabilized too. I'd moved into a nice 2-bedroom apartment in Millbrook's historic district, complete with a garden where I could test new rehabilitation techniques. I'd made friends, real friends, not people who tolerated me out of obligation. My weekly book club with Eleanor and 3 other women had become the highlight of my social calendar. The financial success was staggering even to me. Phoenix Plant Recovery was generating over $2 million in annual revenue, and my personal net worth had crossed the 7-figure mark. I kept detailed spreadsheets not because I was obsessed with money, but because the numbers represented something more important: independence. "Have you thought about expanding internationally?" asked Marcus Thompson, my business attorney, during our quarterly review. "We've been getting inquiries from Canada and the UK. "One step at a time," I replied, though the idea was tempting. "I want to make sure we're doing this right before we get too ambitious." The truth was, I was already thinking about the next phase. The plant rehabilitation business had taught me that there were profitable opportunities hiding in plain sight all around us, if you knew how to look for them. I'd started investing in other small businesses, applying the same principle of finding undervalued potential and helping it grow. But the real satisfaction came from the personal victories, like the day I hired Tommy Martinez, a 19-year-old who'd been written off by everyone else but had an incredible intuition for plant care. Or when Sarah Mitchell, who'd taken that first chance on me, sold her garden center and became one of my licensed operators in Florida. You've changed my whole perspective on what's possible, Sarah told me during her retirement party. Watching you build this from nothing, it's inspired half the women in this town to take risks they never would have considered. I'd started keeping a journal of lessons learned, partly for potential future employees, but mostly for myself. The biggest lesson: never let anyone else define your worth. James and Jessica had decided I was useless, a burden they couldn't afford to carry. They'd thrown me away without a second thought. What they didn't know was that they'd just given me the motivation to become everything they'd never imagined I could be. Every contract signed, every new location opened, every success story was proof that their judgment had been spectacularly wrong. And honestly, I was just getting started. The house hunting began as a practical decision and ended as an act of pure, beautiful revenge. After 5 years of apartment living, I needed more space for my expanding business ventures and investment portfolio. What I found instead was the perfect way to announce to Millbrook that Margaret Williams was no longer the woman anyone could throw away. The Harrison estate, Jennifer Walsh, my realtor, repeated when I mentioned the property. Maggie, that house hasn't been on the market in 40 years. It's the most prestigious address in Millbrook Heights. Millbrook Heights, the neighborhood where James and Jessica had always dreamed of living, but could never afford. The neighborhood they'd drive through on Sunday afternoons, fantasizing about someday while living in their modest colonial with the mortgage they'd kicked me out to afford. Is it for sale? I asked simply. Well, yes, but Jennifer hesitated. The asking price is $4.2 million. Let's take a look. The Harrison estate was everything I'd expected and more. 12,000 square feet of pristine colonial architecture sitting on 8 acres of manicured grounds, master suite with fireplaces, a library with floor-to-ceiling mahogany shelves, a chef's kitchen that could feed a small army, and a conservatory that was basically a greenhouse attached to the house. But what really sold me was the view from the master bedroom window. You could see the entire town of Millbrook spread out below, including the modest neighborhood where James and Jessica lived. Every morning I could wake up and literally look down on the people who'd look down on me. The sellers are motivated, Jennifer explained as we toured the wine cellar. They've already moved to Florida and want a quick close. Cash offer, I said without hesitation. $3.8 million close in 2 weeks. Jennifer nearly dropped her briefcase. Maggie, are you sure? That's a huge commitment. I was more than sure. Phoenix Plant Recovery was throwing off enough profit to cover the mortgage payments easily, and my investment portfolio had grown to the point where I could afford the down payment without touching my business accounts. But more than that, I could afford it because I'd earned every penny through my own intelligence, determination, and hard work. The sellers accepted my offer within 6 hours. 2 weeks later, I stood in the grand foyer of my new home, holding the keys and trying not to laugh out loud at the absurdity of it all. 6 years earlier, I'd been sleeping in a motel room with less than $1,000 to my name. Now, I owned the most expensive house in the county. The moving truck arrived the next morning. Though honestly, my furniture from the apartment looked ridiculous in rooms this size. I'd need to do some serious shopping, but that was a problem I was happy to have. I spent my first evening on the massive back deck, watching the sunset paint the sky pink and gold over my 8 acres of property. The silence was profound. No traffic noise, no neighbors arguing. Just peace and space and the profound satisfaction of a goal achieved. My phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor. Saw the real estate transfer in the paper. You magnificent woman. Champagne celebration this weekend. I smiled, typing back. Bring the good stuff. We're toasting to new beginnings. What I didn't type but was thinking was that some beginnings require endings. And I had a feeling that the ending to my relationship with James and Jessica was about to become very, very interesting. Tomorrow, I'd start the process of furnishing my new life. Tonight, I'd simply enjoy the view from the top. The doorbell rang at 9:17 a.m. on a Saturday, Exactly 24 hours after the real estate transfer hit the local paper. I was in my new kitchen, still figuring out which cabinet held the coffee mugs, when I heard that familiar two-tone chime echoing through my marble foyer. Through the security monitor, because yes, my house came with a security system that would make Fort Knox jealous, I saw them standing on my front porch like door-to-door salespeople. James looked older, grayer around the temples, wearing khakis and a polo shirt that screamed weekend dad trying too hard. Jessica stood beside him in designer jeans and a blazer that probably cost more than my first month's rent at Yeppies. Behind them were two teenagers I barely recognized. Emma, now 16, had inherited her mother's sharp features, but thankfully not her cruel eyes. Tony, 14, looked like a taller version of James at that age, back when he used to build fort blankets and bring me dandelions from the yard. I took my time walking to the front door, my bare feet silent on the heated marble floors. 6 years of silence, and they show up the day after they discover I'm rich. The timing was so perfectly predictable it was almost funny. Well, I said, opening the door but not the screen. James, Jessica, children I barely know. I let my gaze travel over them slowly, noting Jessica's carefully applied makeup and James's nervous fidgeting. To what do I owe this unexpected pleasure? Mom. James's voice cracked slightly. We read about the house in the paper. We wanted to congratulate you. How thoughtful. I didn't invite them in. Congratulations delivered. Anything else? Jessica stepped forward with that bright fake smile I remembered so well. Maggie, we know things ended badly between us. We've had time to reflect and we realize we handled everything wrong 6 years ago. Handled everything wrong, I repeated slowly. Is that what we're calling it? Emma shifted uncomfortably behind her parents. Grandma Maggie, I barely remember you. But Mom and Dad said you used to make amazing chocolate chip cookies. The girl's innocent comment hit harder than her parents' practiced apologies. She was right. She barely remembered me because they'd stolen 6 years of her childhood from both of us. 6 years of birthdays, school plays, bedtime stories, and grandmother-granddaughter moments that we'd never get back. I did make good cookies, I said softly, looking at Emma. Then I turned back to her parents before I was thrown out like garbage. Mom, please, James pleaded. Can we come in? Can we talk? Talk about what exactly? Jessica's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the calculating woman underneath. We're family, Maggie, and family should stick together, especially when she gestured vaguely at the mansion behind me. When there's room for everyone, there it was, the real reason for their visit, delivered with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Room for everyone, I amused. How convenient that you've discovered your family feelings now that I have 12,000 square feet. That's not fair, James protested. But his eyes were already cataloging what he could see of the house interior. We've missed you. The kids have missed having a grandmother. I laughed at the absurdity of it. James, honey, you threw me out of your house with 2 suitcases and a cardboard box. Jessica told me I was too set in my ways, and that figuring out my life wasn't your problem anymore. Now you miss me. The silence stretched until Tony spoke up. Dad, what is she talking about? Why don't you come in? I said, finally stepping back from the door. Since you're so interested in family reunions, I led them through the foyer, past the crystal chandelier and marble staircase into the living room with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the grounds. I watched their faces as they took in the silk wallpaper, the Persian rugs, the artwork that cost more than most people's cars. This place is incredible, Tony breathed, walking to the windows. Mom, look at the pool. Jessica was looking all right. I could practically see her calculating square footage and property values. It's certainly spacious, she said carefully. Much too big for one person. Is it? I settled into my favorite armchair, a beautiful wingback in navy blue velvet that I'd bought specifically for this room. I find I quite like having space to breathe. James sat on the edge of the sofa like he was afraid to wrinkle the fabric. Mom, about what happened 6 years ago. We were dealing with a lot of stress. New mortgage. My job situation was uncertain. Jessica was working full-time with 2 small kids. So, naturally, the solution was to make your widowed mother homeless. I finished. Very logical. We thought you'd figure something out, Jessica said defensively. You're so capable, so independent. We never imagined you'd end up in a motel. I raised an eyebrow. You never imagined it because you never bothered to check. Emma was studying a family photo on the side table, One of the few pictures I'd kept from my old life. It showed James as a young boy, maybe 8 years old, sitting on my lap while I read him a story. "Dad, you were really little," she said. "That was taken right after your grandfather left." I told her, "Your dad and I lived alone for 10 years. I worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat. Made sure he had everything he needed for school. Drove him to baseball practice every Tuesday and Thursday." I looked directly at James. I thought that meant something. "It did mean something," James said quietly. "It means everything. That's why we're here." "No," I said firmly. "You're here because you want something. The question is, are you going to be honest about what it is? Or are we going to keep pretending this is about family connections?" Jessica's patience was clearly wearing thin. "Fine," she snapped. "Yes, we need help. James lost his job 3 months ago. We're behind on the mortgage and Emma needs money for college applications. Happy now?" Deliriously, I said dryly. "Now we're getting somewhere." "The thing is," James jumped in, shooting Jessica a warning look. "We were thinking you have all this space and we're struggling with our housing situation. You want to move in?" It wasn't a question. "Temporarily," Jessica added quickly. "Just until James finds another position. Maybe 6 months, a year at most." I looked around my beautiful, peaceful living room, then back at the people who discarded me the moment I became inconvenient. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly. You want to move your entire family into my house because you're having financial difficulties." "We're family," James repeated, like it was a magic word that would open all doors. "Family?" I amused. "Is that what you called it when you locked me out of your house? When you told me figuring out my life wasn't your problem anymore?" The silence that followed was broken only by the ticking of the antique clock on the mantelpiece. Finally, Tony spoke up again. "What happened 6 years ago? Why won't anyone explain what you're talking about?" I looked at the 2 teenagers, these grandchildren I'd been robbed of knowing, and made a decision. "Sit down," I told them. "Both of you, it's time you learned exactly what kind of people your parents really are." "Mom, don't," James warned. But I held up a hand. "Emma, Tony, 6 years ago your grandfather died. I was 60 years old, recently widowed, and I needed a place to stay while I figured out my next steps. Your parents invited me to live with them." I kept my voice calm, factual. "For 3 months I helped with child care. I contributed my social security checks to household expenses and tried to stay out of the way." Emma and Tony were listening intently, their faces serious. "Then one morning your mother decided I was too set in my ways and told me I had to leave. Immediately, your father packed my belongings into 2 suitcases and put me on the front porch. I had $847 and nowhere to go." "That's not how it happened," Jessica protested. "You were interfering with our parenting decisions, undermining our authority with the children." "I made them breakfast," I said simply, "and I suggested they say please and thank you." Apparently, that qualified as undermining authority. Tony looked confused. "But where did you go? What did you do?" "I lived in a motel for 6 weeks, then a studio apartment above a pizza place. I worked part-time at a garden center for $15 an hour." I smiled at the memory. "Best thing that ever happened to me, actually." "How is being homeless the best thing that ever happened to you?" Emma asked. "Because it taught me that I didn't need anyone to take care of me. I could take care of myself just fine." I gestured around the room. "Better than fine, as it turns out." Jessica was getting agitated. "This is ancient history, Maggie. We're trying to move forward to rebuild our relationship." "No," I interrupted. "You're trying to rebuild your bank account. There's a difference." I pulled out my phone and showed them a text message I'd received earlier that morning. "This is from Nancy Martinez, a friend of mine who works at the unemployment office. She mentioned seeing a familiar name cross her desk recently." I looked directly at James. "You didn't lose your job 3 months ago. You were fired 6 months ago for falsifying expense reports." James's face went white. "How did I know things, James?" "I know Jessica opened 3 new credit cards last year and maxed them out on designer clothes and spa treatments. I know you refinanced your house twice to pay for that vacation to Italy. I know you're not just behind on your mortgage, you're facing foreclosure next month." The silence in the room was deafening. "I also know," I continued, "that you drove by my motel every single day for 6 months after you threw me out. You knew exactly where I was living and exactly how much I was struggling. And you never once stopped to check if I was okay." Emma's eyes filled with tears. Dad, is that true? James couldn't look at his daughter. Jessica, however, had switched to full attack mode. Fine. So we made mistakes. So did you. You could have asked for help instead of disappearing for 6 years. I laughed. Asked for help from the people who told me figuring out my life wasn't their problem. From the daughter-in-law who called me a burden. We were young. We were stressed. You were cruel, I said quietly. And now you want me to pretend it never happened because you need something from me. Tony suddenly stood up, his face flushed with anger. This is messed up, he said, his voice cracking. Dad, you told us Grandma Maggie moved to Florida to be near her sister. You said she didn't want to see us anymore. We never said that exactly, James started. Yes, you did. Emma jumped up too, her voice rising. You said she chose her new life over being part of our family. You made us think she abandoned us. I felt a surge of vindication mixed with sadness. These children had been lied to for 6 years. Robbed of their grandmother because their parents were too proud to admit what they'd done. There's something else you should know, I said softly. About 6 months after I moved out, your father came to see me. Jessica's head snapped toward James. What? You didn't tell her? I asked James, genuinely surprised. How interesting. James was sweating now, his polo shirt sticking to his back. Mom, please. He showed up at my apartment on a Tuesday evening. I continued, watching Jessica's face carefully. He'd been drinking and he was crying. He said he missed me, that he'd made a terrible mistake, that he wanted me to come home. You're lying, Jessica said, but her voice was uncertain. I pulled out my phone again and scrolled to an old photo. I took a picture of the letter he wrote me that night. Would you like me to read it out loud? The letter was 3 pages long, handwritten on legal pad paper. In it, James apologized profusely for letting Jessica convince him to throw me out. He admitted that he missed me desperately, that the house felt empty without me, that he realized he'd chosen his wife's convenience over his mother's well-being. But the most damning part was the last paragraph where he begged me not to tell Jessica about his visit, because she's already threatened to leave me if I try to bring you back. He chose you. I told Jessica calmly. He chose keeping you happy over doing the right thing by his mother. And for 6 years he's been lying to all of you about it. Jessica turned to James, her face a mask of fury. You went behind my back. You wrote her a letter. I was drunk. James mumbled. I wasn't thinking clearly. No, I said you were thinking clearly for the first time in months. That's what scared you. Emma was crying openly now. 6 years, she whispered. We missed 6 years with you because of their lies. But here's the thing, I said, standing up and smoothing down my silk blouse. I'm not the same woman who got thrown out 6 years ago. That woman was broken, dependent, willing to accept crumbs of affection from people who saw her as a burden. I walked to the window, looking out at my perfectly manicured grounds. This woman owns a multi-million-dollar business. This woman has friends who respect her, employees who depend on her, and investments that generate more income in a month than your father made in a year when he had a job. I turned back to face them. This woman doesn't need anything from anyone, especially not from people who threw her away like garbage and now want to move into her house because they've mismanaged their own lives. The silence stretched until Tony spoke up, his voice small. So, you don't want a relationship with us even now that you know we were lied to? The question broke my heart, but I kept my expression neutral. I want a relationship with you and Emma. You're innocent victims in this situation, but your parents? I looked directly at James and Jessica. Your parents are going to have to earn their way back into my life if they can. Jessica stood up abruptly, her mask of false sweetness finally discarded completely. This is ridiculous, she snapped. We're your family, Maggie. You can't just pick and choose which parts of us you want. Watch me, I replied calmly. Fine, Jessica continued, her voice rising. You want to play games? You want to punish us for something that happened 6 years ago? We'll just leave. Come on, James. Kids, we don't need this. But Emma didn't move. Neither did Tony. They sat on my expensive sofa, looking between their parents and me with expressions of confusion and betrayal. Actually, Emma said quietly, I want to stay and talk to Grandma Maggie alone. Emma, we're leaving. Jessica commanded. No. Emma's voice was stronger now. I'm 16 years old and I just found out you've been lying to me for 6 years about my grandmother. I want to hear her side of the story. Tony nodded. Me too. Jessica looked like she was about to explode, but James put a hand on her arm. Maybe we should give them some time, he said quietly. Don't you dare take her side, Jessica hissed at him. I'm not taking anyone's side, James replied. But he was looking at me with something that might have been regret. I'm trying to think about what's best for our children. For a moment, I saw a glimpse of the man who'd written me that letter 6 years ago, the son who'd been torn between his wife's demands and his conscience. But the moment passed quickly. Fine, Jessica said. But we're not done here, Maggie. We'll be back. No, I said firmly. You won't. Not unless you're invited. This is my house, my property, and I have an excellent security system. If you show up uninvited again, I'll have you arrested for trespassing. Jessica's face went through several shades of red. You can't keep us from our children. I'm not keeping anyone from anyone, I said. But I'm also not allowing you to use them as emotional blackmail. Emma and Tony are welcome here anytime they want to visit. You and James are not. Not until you've proven you've changed. Proven how? James asked. I considered the question carefully. Start by telling your children the complete truth about what happened 6 years ago. Not your version, not Jessica's version, the truth. Then get your financial house in order without asking me for help. Show me you can stand on your own 2 feet like the adults you claim to be. And then maybe we can have a conversation about forgiveness. Maybe. I smiled coldly. But don't hold your breath. After they left, I sat with Emma and Tony for 2 hours, answering their questions, showing them photo albums from their father's childhood and listening to their stories about school, friends, and dreams for the future. They were good kids despite their parents' failures, and I could see echoes of the little boy I'd raised in both of them. Can we come back next weekend? Emma asked as I walked them to the door. Anytime you want, I promised. I have 6 years of grandmothering to catch up on. As I watched their car disappear down my long driveway, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Complete satisfaction. Not revenge exactly, but justice. The people who'd thrown me away were now the ones begging for scraps, while the woman they discarded was living in luxury they could never afford. I'd proven that being thrown away doesn't mean being worthless. Sometimes it just means you're finally free to discover your true value. And sometimes the best revenge really is living well. The next morning, I called Eleanor to tell her about the visit. How do you feel? She asked after I'd shared the whole story. I looked out at my beautiful grounds, sipped my coffee from expensive china, and smiled. I feel like I'm exactly where I belong. Finally. Some victories are quiet. This one was perfect. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.